The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, we discussed that there was every indication that if John Boehner, Speaker of the House, Republican member of Congress, decided to hold a vote simply on funding government without including preconditions about defunding Obamacare, that there were the votes, meaning all Democrats and at least 17 Republicans to vote for it. Last week, it was an educated guess, speculation of sorts, and it has now been confirmed. ForwardProgressives.com has an article about this. Last night, according to a survey done by CNN, there are enough votes in the House of Representatives to reopen the government and end the shutdown. CNN did a survey. They found that there were 200 Democrats and 18 specific and confirmed Republicans who would vote in favor of the clean resolution that the Senate sent over prior to the shutdown. Remember that, ladies and gentlemen, prior to the shutdown, none of this was even remotely necessary. And it's just not happening. It depends on John Boehner calling a vote, and it has not been done. Why has it not been done, Lewis?
Well, I don't know if we can tell you why John Boehner is doing what he's doing exactly. Who knows if he even knows? But I do know that this should not be in the hands of one person. It doesn't make sense. I mean, the system needs to change.
No question about it. And President Obama, speaking directly about this obstruction, he said, quote, "The truth of the matter is there are enough Republican and Democratic votes in the House of Representatives right now to end this shutdown immediately with no partisan strings attached, of course, like defunding all of Obamacare, which was democratically passed and upheld by the Supreme Court." Think about this. Right now, we have a bill sitting in Congress that would pass the House of Representatives. It has already been passed by the Senate, and the president would sign it immediately and reopen government, except one man, John Boehner, won't allow it to come up for a vote. And as Alan Clifton writes on Forward Progressives, just imagine this situation for a moment. Imagine that Congress passed a bill 3.5 years ago, and a Republican president signed it into law. Then right before it's fully implemented, a Democratic-controlled House of Representatives decides to tie it to a budget bill in an attempt to block it, and in doing so, they refuse to allow a vote on a bill that a Republican-controlled Senate passed, a Republican president said they would sign, and that we know would pass the House if only Nancy Pelosi were to allow a vote, but she refused to do so. Do you know what would be going on right now on Fox News, on Rush Limbaugh, on conservative media? They would be screaming their heads off that this is just not constitutional, that this is circumventing the constitutional law and understanding of how we are supposed to pass bills. It would be a madhouse. But because the situation is reversed and it's Republicans, supposedly the constitutional ones or something, according to the Tea Party, we're not hearing that at all, Lewis.
No, and I'm willing to bet that Nancy Pelosi would have been receiving multiple death threats, if not had attempts on her life made, to be perfectly honest.
I think you're absolutely right. So the double standard here, we talked yesterday about the 50-50 nonsense that's going on in terms of corporate media coverage of this. This is not a 50-50 thing. This is a Republican-led, and now Republicans are the barrier, the lone barrier that remains, and not the 18 Republicans that would vote to end the shutdown, specifically John Boehner, and simply not having a vote on this. Let's vote and see what happens. I don't even know if we're going to get that, Lewis, anytime soon.
Sounds like the Democratic thing to do. Hopefully Boehner comes to his senses.
This element of the Republican Party that is the element that makes a lot of news in terms of their positions on social issues, in terms of their extremist views on aspects of culture, on the Constitution, on all sorts of areas of government, has now crossed the line, in my opinion, into just being completely incoherent and just presenting nothing that's even related to the real world. And an example of that is Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen. Mark Wayne Mullen is a guy we've talked about in the past. He had this quote a couple of months ago where he said, if we raise the minimum wage, all of a sudden, hamburgers at McDonald's are going to cost $20. And people said to me, listen, David, he was just being metaphorical. He wasn't saying literally a hamburger would cost $20. He was just saying if the minimum wage goes up, it's going to force up prices. Okay, maybe that was just an analogy. Let's listen to his latest comment, or rather, I'll tell you about it. 4 branches of government should be working together. 4 branches? I thought there were only 3. What did he say? He said, this country isn't ran. I'm reading it the way he said it, okay? So I know this is a very weird thing to listen to. This country isn't ran by just one individual. It's ran by 4 branches, but 3 branches that are in control of this. As long as those 3 branches control it, then we all have to figure out how to negotiate. Not all of us is going to get 100% of what we want, but we should do what's right. I can't understand a lot of this comment. It's only a couple of lines long, but it's even after reading it 10 or 20 times this morning, Lewis, I still don't really understand what he's talking about. But what's clear is he's talking about the country being run, or ran, as he said, by 4 branches of government, of which 3 need to take some kind of action. Is he referring to religion as the 4th branch of government, which the Constitution strictly forbids? Is he referring to the Republican Party as the 4th branch of government? Isn't this just kind of a basic thing, the 3 branches of government?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this. I just really can't even understand. I have no idea what he could possibly be referencing, what he could possibly be trying to include into the branches of government. I mean, it's possible that he just might not know that there are only 3, or maybe he thinks, maybe he's just trying to be clever and including something that we can't figure out.
When I covered his story about his comment about if we raise the minimum wage, hamburgers will be $20. Remember, people were saying, I'm taking it out of context. He was just speaking metaphorically. Is he also speaking metaphorically about the 4 branches of government, or is this time, do we agree he's just saying a lot of nonsense? And maybe this is actually the explanation. I'm actually thinking a little more creatively here. Maybe this is why the John Boehner-led House of Representatives, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, has done nothing, because they've been sitting around waiting for this 4th branch of government to pass bills or something. Is that possible?
That would be a shocking revelation if we learned that all these Republicans thought there was another branch of government. But when it comes to Markwayne Mullin, all you really need to do is look at a picture of the guy to realize that there's really not much going on upstairs.
But Lewis, isn't that ad hominem? Shouldn't we really be listening to what he says rather than his appearance?
We've done both, David.
Okay. And you're not impressed with either, is what you're telling me.
No, not in the least, no.
There are 10,000 estimated sick from a salmonella chicken outbreak. This is the second time this year federal officials are warning the public about salmonella infections associated specifically with Foster Farms chicken. In this latest outbreak, officials have confirmed about 280 cases, according to a public health alert. And the previous breakout, which was in July, just a couple of months ago, the CDC noted about 135 illnesses. Now, they actually have a metric, which is they assume that for every 1 reported case, 25 go unreported. And based on that, if you take the 280 cases plus the 135, multiply that by 25, they estimate that around 10,000 people have been sickened in the last 12 months based on that multiplier. That's a lot of people to develop food poisoning after consuming a product that is well known to have been contaminated with salmonella. This was traced to raw chicken. The USDA alert and a Foster Farms statement both stress the importance of safe food handling, saying food needs to be cooked, that chicken, poultry needs to be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. However, when we actually look more deeply at this, Dr. Katrina Hedberg, who's an epidemiologist, said consumers are actually not to blame. This is not an outbreak because people decided to eat their chicken too rare. This is simply because of too much bacteria. So, Lewis, again, this is interesting because we've been using the example recently of foodborne illness as the culprit of far more deaths in most years for Americans than terrorism, and the disproportionate amount of industry and spending that surrounds the security complex, and disproportionately little attention is paid to things like food inspection, which even because of the shutdown could suffer. Here we're seeing those numbers again, 10,000 estimated sick this year because of salmonella.
Right, and I guess it's a matter, or it should be a matter of priority. But we have our priorities backwards. You know, David, if these terrorists had lobbyists and were over in this country, helping out our politicians, I bet you things would be very different.
They would be drastically different. And the USDA has actually known about this problem for a decade. Oregon scientists have been tracking a Salmonella Heidelberg strain, not to be confused with Heisenberg, of course, first associated with Foster Farms back in 2004. And the reason why they continue selling raw poultry is that you can actually have a 10% incidence rate of salmonella and continue to operate. Does that sound high to you, Lewis?
Does seem a little high. That sounds strange, but might be true, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is true. I mean, factually speaking, you're allowed to have a 10% incidence rate of salmonella. The big thing we need to be focusing on here, though, is remember, foodborne illness versus terrorism in terms of deaths caused, and the disproportionate amount of privacy that has been given up and money of yours, tax money, that has been spent on the one of those two that is actually responsible for less deaths during the average year. Florida police are making a lot of money selling cocaine, and there's a really good investigation that is extensively detailed in the Sun Sentinel out of Florida. And it outlines, Lewis, how undercover detectives have an army of informants that they use to lure in big money drug buyers into Florida from all over the United States, even from Canada, even as far south as Peru. They negotiate sales for kilos of cocaine in family restaurants. They bust in and get the buyers and seize the cash, the cars that they rode in on. And police are confiscating millions of dollars from these deals. And this is money that goes directly to fuel huge overtime payments for the police officers. And they also are paying a lot of money to these confidential informants. In fact, the Sun Sentinel investigation talks about how one specific femme fatale informant has earned more than $800,000 over the last 5 years for her success in drawing in these drug dealers to Florida. This, to me, really shows the incredible spending and infrastructure that is put into this drug war, which by many estimations simply cannot be won. It's hard to even really define what a win would be. But what we really are finding out more and more is that there's no such thing as winning the drug war. It's used disproportionately to fund all sorts of industries that are within the kind of surveillance and crime fighting, drug enforcement realm. The war on drugs is, of course, used disproportionately to imprison disproportionately minority drug offenders. We know all about that, and we know about the racist origins of the drug war, kind of in response to the desegregation by law of the United States. And this is yet another example. I mean, $800,000, Lewis, to one informant. This is all being done simply because we have this war on drugs. We have this structure where we've determined this is a good use of time, bringing in, and remember, bringing in buyers, not even bringing in distributors or sellers, bringing in buyers of cocaine from all over. This is a disaster.
It's a total disaster. This is on par with what's going on with for-profit prisons and things of that nature. I mean, and you have to assume that the individual police departments involved have to be loving this, and they're probably a lot of the voices that are keeping it going. But you're right; it literally is a war that cannot be won, and it's just a giant quagmire.
And this is not illegal. Miami attorney Joel DeFabio says this is not illegal. It is not even considered improper under our current law, but it is unusual. Most law enforcement agencies don't draw in buyers from such far distances as Canada or Peru. Meanwhile, people don't have the mental health services they need. White collar crime is out of control. We've got nonviolent drug offenders filling up our prisons and having their lives completely upended because of possession that in many countries would not even be considered criminal. But, cops are making millions and they're paying informants absurd amounts of money to set up reverse stings. This is just such a wrong direction to be going in. And I don't know that it can really be turned around. Hopefully, at least the marijuana decriminalization is a start in that direction.
Definitely a start. I mean, decriminalizing small amounts of all of these things is where we're headed. It's going to take us a while to get there, but I believe we will.
North Korea is really upset because they can't get some ski lifts. We've got a Michigan pint bill, and also a bar that Lewis frequents makes national headlines. All of these stories and more are on today's bonus show, which you can access as a David Pakman Show member and supporter. Visit our website, davidpakman.com/membership. We are not funded by big corporations. We're funded by you. Become a member at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
You can support the David Pakman Show for free with the shopping you already plan to do on Amazon.com. Just visit our website, davidpakman.com, scroll down the right side, click on the Amazon banner, bookmark it, use it whenever you shop, and we'll get a small commission from any purchases you make on Amazon.com. You can also become a David Pakman Show member, which is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're worried about liberal bias in statistics, math, other reality-based things, just visit liberalbias.com, where you can find out how to unskew reality and make it easier for conservatives to handle. Today's new member of the day is Jeffrey Martinez. Jeffrey, thanks for being a David Pakman Show member. Awesome. Couldn't do it without you. And you should join Jeffrey by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Lewis, it is Wednesday, and with no further delay, it is time for Hatriot Mail.
I love
If
Hatriot
Ayn
Mail.
Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Patriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, so this week on Hatriot Mail, there's a theme. I'm going to play 2 Hatriot Mails for you. The theme here is college. The theme is college. Let's take a listen and see if we can figure out what it's all about.
Most of your views and opinions are clearly that of an extremely immature person. My advice would be for you to close shop at your garbage show.
Yeah.
And maybe even attend college. Dumbass.
All right, there is Hatriot Mail number 1, and then Hatriot Mail number 2 on this college-themed Hatriot Mail day.
Up yours. You are one of the biggest loser opportunists I have ever come across. Give it up, scumbag. Go to college.
All right, so I don't really understand where this comes from, Lewis, this idea that I need to go to college, and multiple Hatriot Mails seem to think, I don't know if the assumption is because I'm doing this show, and they must also assume I'm way younger than I am, I must have skipped college and or never have gone, or they just assume that because I'm liberal, I didn't go to college or something, which doesn't make sense because Rick Santorum thinks college is the place for liberal indoctrination. But let me make it clear. I have not only to kind of channel, what was that guy, Phil Davison? I have a bachelor's degree in economics and communication, and I have a master's degree in business administration. So I don't know where the college the college stuff is coming from.
Neither do I. I think this isn't the first person to make that assumption, though.
No, it's not. It certainly isn't. And I assume it won't be the last. So there it is. That's Hatriot Mail for this week. A Fresno, California mail carrier has been fired for throwing away mail. It just so happens the mail they were throwing away was all related to Obamacare and letting residents of California know what they need to do to find out about their premiums, about Obamacare coverage, so on and so forth. They people who live at this Fresno apartment complex said that they noticed, they actually took pictures of the mail carrier in a really sketchy way, standing near the dumpster and like looking behind him and throwing all this stuff away. And then they went and they figured out it was all these Obamacare letters and pamphlets. He just kept glancing over his shoulder over and over again. It was like he knew what he was doing was wrong, said witness Jerry Dills. Hey, at least he knew what he was doing was wrong. That's something, isn't it, Lewis?
Well, he probably thought he was helping people. I mean, who knows? This could be a guy who understands nothing about Obamacare, but listens to Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck on a regular basis and decided to, to stand up for what he believes in.
Dill says he brought the mail that he found in the garbage to his local post office, where he filed a formal complaint against the carrier. For those who say the entire system is biased against Obamacare, or biased towards Obamacare, rather, we've got a mail carrier who's simply throwing Obamacare mail directly into the trash. We've got a major news channel, although it's not really news, but they call themselves news, Fox News, repeating talking points directly from executives, which came originally from the Republican National Committee, calling Obamacare the government-controlled plan and so on and so forth. You have an entire party, the Republican Party, that was willing to shut down the entire government to basically throw the equivalent of throwing a tantrum over a democratically passed law that was then upheld by the Supreme Court. Anybody who thinks that this entire Obamacare thing was just kind of ushered through with no delays seems to be ignoring all of the facts, which show that at every possible point, there are people trying to get in the way of this becoming the law.
Yeah, unfortunately. And a lot of it is just people who have no clear understanding of how it works. I wonder how many of the politicians who are against it actually understands how it works and the economic impact it will have. It's really unfortunate.
Pat Robertson, who seems to be an expert on demonic possession, on what types of prayer work, on which wars the country should go into because God tells him, which candidates should be elected because God tells him. He's really an expert on so many different things. He now is commenting about diets and nutrition. He was asked about low-carb diets. And again, it's so hard to believe that anybody is seriously asking Pat Robertson for advice about something as specific as a diet, but apparently that is the case. And this is what Pat Robertson had to say.
When your body burns this stuff with no carbohydrates, what happens is you build up the clinkers and you get swollen joints, you get gout, you get all kinds of problems where you ache like crazy. Now, I know everybody, I mean, they thought Atkins was wonderful and they've got all these scientific tests, but that's the truth of it. If you don't have some carbs in there, the carbs are the fire that burn everything completely.
But it sounds like that's what they've discovered, is that there are carbs that are good carbs that you add to it.
Not really. They're not adding anything. I mean, this thing is almost totally fat and protein, and you can eat cheese and you can eat a lot of bacon and so forth. But sooner or later, it violates the principles that God set down.
He's right, Lewis. Don't you remember that reading from church, the one from the Book of Vegetations, verse 4, lines 12 and 13? Thou shalt not have a low-carb diet, as complex sugars and processed foods are the fire that burns to create life in you from the Lord above. It's not the most popular Christian text, but it is a Christian text, isn't it?
David, I think we should investigate whether or not Pat Robertson has investments or ties to any pasta or bread company.
Right, yeah. Hey, you know what? Imagine if it turned out Pat Robertson was a big shareholder in the anti-gay Barilla pasta brand, and now we're seeing the connection. He's now pushing carbs to try to counteract the Barilla boycotts. We need to investigate.
It would not surprise me in the least. We need to get some people on that right now.
Hey, you know what? I'm starting to think Paula Deen may actually be the messenger of God, because this actually sounds like something Paula Deen would preach about.
Probably. I don't think we'll ever hear her preach about anything again, though.
Not that I'm an advocate of the Atkins diet, by the way. I want to make clear I support a well-balanced diet made up of quality and non-processed foods. I am not one of these no-carb people, and I'm not one of these all-carb people. I just call it like I see it, Lewis, and it seems that this is outside of Pat Robertson's area of expertise.
I have to agree. I do not think this is something he should be commenting on at all. Then again, I could say that about most of what he comments on.
All right, let's take a break. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Coming up next, we will interview Judah Fried, and then your voicemails and many, many more things to talk about today. Glad you're with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Judah Fried. He is a seasoned media and political journalist. He's also the award-winning author of The Dawn of Global Sense, Awakening to the Rising Global Consciousness Now Changing Our Lives. Globalsense.com is the website. I'm very interested in this topic because so much now in popular culture, anytime you hear any discussion of a global sensibility, global or borderless considerations and explorations, very quickly there's a contingent of American political observers that jump to conspiracy theories about one world governments and kind of broader plots to control everybody with one government. That couldn't be further from what you're talking about when you talk about this global sense, could it?
I think we are not yet mature enough to be able to even attempt trying to form a global democracy without perverting it into a global tyranny. I would love to see us get to that level of enlightenment where we could actually cooperate, have a network of democracies. But at this point, I don't think we can do it. I'd love to see us instead try what I call a direct republic, in which the citizens get the final vote instead of some king or dictator or president having the final say.
Yeah, so that's something that I've talked about quite a bit, which is we have a system which on paper, in the US anyway, this political system where you have individuals who are allowed to go and they vote, and presumably their representatives are representing their actual views when they make their votes in Congress or in the Senate, wherever the case may be. But the system has really been perverted, I think, in great part because of the influence of money within politics. But is there something systemic that goes above and beyond the money issue that makes it simply not an effective system?
I think the difficulty with representative democracy, and Ben Franklin himself observed this, is that it's prone to corruption. As soon as you separate the electors from the decision making, you tend to have private interest form, which then can produce results that are not really what the citizens themselves really wanted. The key, I think, is to move as closer to direct democracy as we can get, and still in a practical way. That's why I think the idea of a direct republic could open the door, because first of all, if the citizens themselves have the opportunity to approve what the legislators do, then a lot of the crazy laws that we get would no longer get into effect. The corruption that now happens, the voters just say, hey, that's a corrupt law, I'm not going to vote for it, and it won't get in. The earmarks would disappear. The crazy black box projects would disappear.
Although the problem with that, you could make the case that for all the things you mentioned that would be positive effects of such a system, we talk a lot about the idea that we don't want to put basic civil rights to a vote. And this has come up a lot when in the context of marriage equality. And there are parts of this country where if you break it down by state or even by region, where if it were put to a vote, what now appears to be the obvious and correct path that will eventually win, which is that of full marriage equality, it would be voted down. So is there any way to have the positive aspects you mentioned without letting people vote down basic rights?
Yeah, I wonder if that's really statistically true, that it would be voted down. I think...
well, it happened in California with Proposition 8, right? And now we had multiple court battles and appeals. The tide seems to be changing in California, but even still, it literally happened in California.
Well, it happened in Colorado too. Back some years ago, there was Proposition 2, for example. The tricky thing is, I suppose that if you have a constitution that really honestly guarantees those rights, then I think you can have a corrupt legislature with misguided thinking, voting stuff through, and a corrupt governor or president voting, signing stuff just as easily as you can have misguided citizens. I don't really think that's a protection. I think what's really protection is people getting globally enlightened. That is, seeing that we are interconnected, that what you do to me, you're doing to yourself. What I do to you, I'm doing to myself. That everything we think, feel, say, and do has an impact. Because if we know that we are powerfully interconnected, then I think that's going to provide the self-restraint we need to really make more responsible decisions. As long as we are rooted in this, what I call split perception, or even worse, what I call authority addiction, that says that we need strong men to rule us, and that that we think that we're separated and isolated, then those kinds of aberrations can happen.
That's good, because that's actually a good place to kind of jump off and refocus, because when we talk about this kind of global sensibility and the realization that as much as we would like to imagine that these lines that are imaginary that we've drawn between countries really separate the effects and consequences of decisions that are made, we're finding out increasingly that when it comes to the effects of industrialization and the use of carbon and fossil fuels, and really even when it comes to foreign policy and other decisions, those lines are really not stopping anything. In other words, the lines are in our minds, are they not?
I think so. And a lot of the mind map that we carry around is inaccurate. There's a certain level of insanity that goes on. I mean, for example, we think that we can act without consequences. We think that we can pollute and destroy the planet without there being consequences. We think that I mean, here on Kauai, where I live right now, we've got a big fight going on with the genetically modified seed companies that are basically testing pesticides on the excuse of calling themselves farmers. And they're doing these open air spraying, and a lot of people are getting sick, and there's tremendous anecdotal evidence of that. And so right now there's a move here to get a bill passed through the county council that would require disclosure. And at one point, these representatives of the GMO companies sat in the county council chamber, and one of the sponsors of the bill was asking them direct questions about what they are spraying, and they sat there silently for the most part. And so if they're not willing to disclose when they're given a volunteer opportunity, therefore we're asking for the legal right to force them to disclose so that we know what we're being exposed to. But there's a certain thing. I mean, at what point does one person's right to make a profit violate with another person's to live a life?
Well, this really brings up these questions of the kind of standard political labels that you've written about in terms of libertarianism and its concern with liberty and freedom, for example. And we could talk about labels like liberal or conservative. For the sake of discussing libertarianism and liberty, if you consider liberty in the global sense, it's different than if you simply consider it in terms of the United States, is it not? Because we have to consider the liberty of those beyond just our borders. And I think that that's a concept that for a lot of people is very difficult. It's sometimes because of, quote, patriotism or patriot type beliefs, but sometimes because it's just simply overwhelming to think of the world community.
Your beautiful question, and it's got multiple layers to it. There's that old saw that my freedom to swing my hand ends at your nose, which is
right.
That's a hard way to look at it. But I think a lot of the things that have been called libertarian today are perversion of original libertarian ideas, going back to people like Karl Hess. And I think it's one thing to be able to say that there ought to be very little government, and there ought to be a maximum of liberty for the individual. What's happened is the libertarian movement has been co-opted by the objectivist movement of Ayn Rand, which was really taking selfish narcissism and extolling it as a virtue. And I think there's a big difference between the self-reliance libertarians, which I would call myself among those, versus what I call the libertine libertarians that just want freedom without responsibility or accountability. And that, I think, is destructive. That's the kind of thinking, that kind of libertarian objectivist thinking is what produced the financial meltdown in 2008, because those policies were what guided the monetary policy of this country. and produced a worldwide economic collapse. And it's, those same policies have really not been reversed, and we're still facing a similar threat. So I would like to see genuine libertarian values come into play, or even progressive libertarian values, if you will. But again, these labels aren't really the point. The point is that we have to realize that we're all interconnected. And then we're naturally going to see, what is the sensible thing to do? What choice makes global sense and what choice does not make global sense? It's almost like Kant's categorical imperative. If everybody does it, does it make sense?
We've been speaking with Judah Fried. The book, which I recommend, is called The Dawn of Global Sense, Awakening to the Rising Global Consciousness, Now Changing Our Lives. I wish we had more time. It's really a pleasure to speak with you today from Hawaii, which is very cool.
I'm really grateful. And today is, by the way, the debut of the book. And so people go to globalsense.com and get links to being able to buy the book if someone is so interested. My hope is that it'll go viral and help change the way we're thinking and behaving in the world. Because we need to wake up fundamentally.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We sometimes have talked about these stories where horrible crimes are committed, and because of this idea that someone else who sees it will take action, I won't do anything, have led to horrible crimes going completely undeterred in very public places. There's a story that is similar but slightly different being reported by the AP, where a man pulled out a gun on the California BART train. Nobody noticed, and he actually ended up killing someone. Now, some of the articles that have been written say that people were so engrossed in their smartphones that they didn't notice that a guy was pulling out a gun on the train, whereas others say, whether it's a smartphone or a newspaper, if you've been on any big city subway, you know that people just mind their own business because they don't want to get pulled into anything that's going on around them. In either case, I'll give you the details of the story. A man drew a gun several times on a crowded San Francisco commuter train, with surveillance video showing him pointing it across the aisle without anyone noticing, and then putting it back against his side, according to authorities. They've not released any video of this, although they say that they have the video because of the ongoing nature of the investigation. The other passengers were so absorbed in what they were doing and or just pretending not to know what was going on around them, which is a common thing people do on public transit, that they appeared not to notice the gunman until he randomly shot and killed a university student. Footage shows the man pulling out a .45 caliber pistol and once wiping his nose with the hand holding the weapon. According to authorities, these weren't concealed movements. The gun is very clear, said District Attorney George Gascon. These people are in very close proximity with him, and nobody sees this. They're just so engrossed, texting and reading and whatnot, they're completely oblivious to their surroundings. This is Nikom Thefakasone, 30 years old, pled not guilty. Lewis, would you notice this? Do you feel like if you were on a train and this was going on? Or do you think you also are kind of getting to this mode where you've got your tunnel vision, you're reading your thing, and that's what it is?
I have noticed that people tend to look down and mind their own business on these trains. I also understand that a lot of these trains are very busy, full of people, and the one or two people who might be paying attention to their surroundings could have 10 or 20 bodies between them and the person committing a crime, and they might not see it at all. Me personally, I'm always looking around and paying attention to things in places like the subway because I'm surrounded by freaks and I know it and I want to know what's going on around me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between just being absorbed in what you're doing and being totally oblivious. I mean, even when I'm on the subway coming to work or wherever in New York City and I might be reading or looking at my phone, I've got an eye on that guy in the corner that looks like he might start urinating on the train or whatever it is, because you just have to know when these things are happening. So the idea, it's hard for me to imagine being so oblivious that you don't notice someone waving a gun around.
Yeah, on a train full of people, it's truly boggling. But I don't know. I'm sure there might have been one or two people who saw it and didn't want to do anything because they didn't want to get shot.
I want to plant an idea in your minds that we're going to discuss later in the coming weeks and months. Is being gay enough, in the sense that there is a rising trend of more conservative Democrats? Michelangelo Signorile has a great article about this on Huffington Post, and he talks specifically about U.S. Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema, who's a Democrat from Arizona, one of 9 Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives who voted in favor of shutting down the government. She's also the first openly bisexual member of Congress. And the question is being gay a big thing in terms of what it represents as a member of Congress or Senate, that it outweighs the fact that she may be a huge problem in terms of voting for the government shutdown? Or is it the type of situation where all that should matter are her votes? And I have a very specific view about this, Lewis. I think that right now it actually is a big thing when we have openly gay, lesbian, bisexual elected members of Congress. I would like it to be not a big deal. In other words, as more marriage equality legalization takes place across the country, and as more elected officials are openly LGBT, it should be desired, and it probably will happen, that we no longer give them the benefit of the doubt because of the value of having them there because of their sexuality, because hopefully that will just be a normal thing and it won't be even something to be discussed, and we would be able to simply focus on the incredibly damaging nature of those 9 Democrats, regardless of sexuality, who voted to shut down the government.
In reality, we should never be focusing on any of the personal aspects of our elected officials. I mean, it really should make no difference. The only thing that matters is how they vote. I mean, it is great to have these people in office. There have been barriers broken, and it's more a reflection that people are willing to vote gay people into office, which is great. But I agree with you. I don't know. I think we've kind of broken that barrier already. And
the barrier has been broken in the same way that we now have a black president, but the idea that racism doesn't exist because Obama's president, we know, is absurd. And I think the same kind of applies, obviously, when you can still get fired in so many states simply for being gay. So I want a situation where we don't have to care about sexuality. We just focus on the votes. And those are the decisions on which we base our electoral choices. Let's go to your voicemail line, 24 hours a day, 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's listen to a voicemail.
Hi, David. Hi, Lewis. This is Julietta from California. And I must say, I really underestimated how excited I would be to hear my name as a member of the day on your show. I archived it on my Kindle, so I have it to play anytime. I totally geeked out over it. Just thought you should know. Love your guys' show.
All right. So again, you can also, like Julietta, have your name mentioned on the show as member of the day. Just become a member. davidpakman.com/membership. One more voicemail today.
Yo, my name is John Blaskovich, and I'm a member. And I have a question for David. David, I was noticing your wiki page, and I'm not entirely sure how accurate this is because it's wiki. But
Right.
I see that you double majored in economics and communication, and I was wondering, like, when you were in college, did you have any other majors before you started attending college, or while you were in college that you were considering?
Yeah, I
aside
did
from, like,
have
economics or communications. Like,
yeah. So I had like a week where I thought I was going to get an undergraduate business degree. And I quickly found out that at my undergraduate alma mater, University of Massachusetts, the communication and econ programs were really, really good. Not that the business one wasn't. And I decided to focus there. I ended up going back to business in graduate school when I did my MBA. But no, I mean, I think, Lewis, from almost the very beginning, I knew economics and communication were where I was going to be, at least as an undergraduate.
And it's worked out pretty well, I guess, huh?
Loved it absolutely. And hey, I got the business skills later, and that was fine. So there it is. Keep the voicemails coming. 219-2-DAVID-P. Join us on the bonus show. Excellent bonus show today. If you're not getting the bonus show, I don't even know what to tell you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.